of money. To him, it's a huge amount of money. So I think if they're elitist, then it's problematic. How else can archives be? Okay, let's use the example of Bishopsgate Institute. They're my favourite archive, so I guess it's unpacking that, then I can understand why I have problems with others. I don't really have problems with, I think the London Metropolitan Archive are great, but I think I think the work they do is fantastic and they've always been brilliant. But I think maybe why the Bishopsgate appealed to me a bit more is because their archive remit is around campaigning. So that's my thing. London Metropolitan Archives remit is a lot bigger. So when I go into Bishopsgate Institute, it's just like being in a fucking toy shop. The other reason why I love Bishopsgate Institute is the fact of where they're placed. They are in the fucking belly of the beast. They're in the square mile. Yeah, they're in the square mile. It's such a juxtaposition. They're surrounded by some of the most horrific institutions on the planet. They're nemesis, and yet they're still there. I think they've got one really rich left-wing benefactor, which is the reason why they're still there and they haven't been fucked over by austerity. And it's just hilarious. It's like, you know, when I go out and have a fag, and I'm just like, what? Barclays Bank, NatWest, HSBC, and then Bishopsgate Institute with their rainbow flag outside. You walk in and they've got the suffragettes, they've got the Black Panther movement, and it's just, you know, it's why we love London, you know. But it's their placing of where they are, because archives shouldn't hide away from being a threat to the status quo, challenging themselves and challenging society.
Okay, so let me try and summarize what you said about the difficulties so far, like elitists.
Yes. I've just thought of another example.
Okay, yeah, what are the examples?
So it's the elitist. Okay, so when archives aren't achieving what they could, whether they're problematic or just not, or they're not negative, they're just not hitting above their weight, kicking above their weight, is when they shy away from being a challenge, and we need to be a challenge, when it stays in its comfort zone. I mean, a classic example, so it's elitist, it's being too comfortable, it's not being intersectional, it's not joining the dots. There's a lot of things which are very predictable out there. Like, for example, we want to know, we know it's easy to find out the journey of the women's liberation movement, it's easy to find out the journey of the Black Power movement, it's easy to find the journey of the Queer Power movement. What we want to learn is how they operated together, and those conversations behind the scene which enable them all to live in solidarity. Another example of a shit archive is I do a lot of work around Holocaust Memorial and around anti-war. There's a lot of let's take Yad Vashem. Let's go right in. Yad Vashem. Yad Vashem is the Holocaust Memorial in Jerusalem. There's some really good articles written about it. So my grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and so they're documented in the archive in Yad Vashem. I can't remember what Yad Vashem stands for in probably the Holocaust Museum in Hebrew. On the surface, it's a really important thing. Obviously, Holocaust Memorial is really important, but who for and what's the agenda? So they only document the Jewish voice. What about the Roma? What about the people of colour? What about the disability? What about the dissidents? What about every other community which was persecuted? So therefore they're part of the problem rather than the solution. They're a Zionist institution, so they're all about promotion of the State of Israel, which for me is very much a separate thing from the Holocaust Memorial, what it should be. Separating Judaism and Zionism and Holocaust Memorial. The way that the building is even set up and built is so that it manipulates you into supporting the State of Israel. So, and I'm sure there's other examples of archives, who they're funded by, who their agenda is set by, which informs the very building, the very physical architectural infrastructure of it. So with Yad Vashem, you go in there, and the first thing you're in this room where they read the 6 million names of the Jews one after the other, and they have pictures of them on the ceiling. So of course it's like total paralysing victimhood. And then as you go through, the kind of subtext is look what they did to us, look what they did to us, look what they did to us. Deeper, deeper, deeper. And in the end, you end with a beautiful view over East Jerusalem, which is in the site of apartheid, with the Golden Dome Temple, which is in Palestine, in East Jerusalem, but the Zionists want to take it, and that's exactly what's going on with Trump and everyone moving the embassies to Jerusalem. So it's like victimhood, victimhood, victimhood. Look what we deserve. So that's a really strong example. Or another one, which I can't believe, I need to write something about this. The Museum of Tolerance is built by the Zionists in East Jerusalem on a bulldozed Muslim graveyard. So it's like, we'll tolerate you, i.e. Muslims, but we've just built we built this on your dead grandma. Do you know what I mean? So it gets so barbaric. Yeah, I mean, that's like next level bad example of archive. There's some beautiful examples. Another example, she's got me started there, the AIDS Memorial. This is also a really interesting example of how we archive. And it was fiercely debated. So part of ACT UP I'm involved in. You've got the New York AIDS Memorial, which was built maybe 5 years ago. Really controversial. I've not been there. I can find out what the controversy was. I didn't pay credit just to the white gay male story rather than everyone involved in the AIDS pandemic. Was it funded by Big Pharma, for example? Was it co-opted by the very people who were part of the problem? We don't have an AIDS memorial in London. That's part of an ongoing campaign. But an example of archiving within the AIDS struggle is documented in various different ACT UP and HIV films. The quilts, the AIDS quilt, you know about the AIDS quilt? That was in the 90s. AIDS quilt, a giant quilt, like bed quilt, where people created their own patch for the quilt of their dead loved one as a kind of tool for memorialization. And an action I think super controversial, are you really going to do that? Okay, cool. And I supported it. I wasn't there, it was before my time. ACT UP New York, I think, went and disrupted the AIDS quilt ceremony. Really controversial because you think everyone would be on the same page. But they were saying this quilt is pacifying us because it's saying there's no ongoing problem, and there, of course it is when it comes to AIDS epidemic. It's still raging on in many different ways. And they were saying it's literally smothering us when we need to continue taking to the streets. So I think that's another example of problematic archives.
Wow. What got you into archives, and what were any barriers you might have faced, and how did this get broken down for you to end up working with archives?
I think what got me into archives, and it's only really in the last couple of years, mainly through Queer Tours of London, which has only been going 2 years. Well, basically, the curation of a queer tour is we get requests, and I really like getting new requests of new spaces because it's interesting. Otherwise, you're just doing we can do Soho tours, we can do Hackney tours, but when we get a request to a queer tour of Wapping, for example, a lot of people think, what's queer about Wapping? And the more you research, the more you look into the archives, the more you realise that every street, every building has a queer history. Like in Wapping, there was the lesbian and gay support the print workers strike in 1986. That's where News of the World was. I know, amazing. Just down the road, that's where loads of the radical queer communes during the Gay Liberation Front were, let alone radical queer sex workers, movements and houses. So I go into Bishopsgate Institute, that's the first stage. They're so helpful as well. We've now got the Queer Tours archive in there. On a very practical level, archives are really good for clearing out your flat. Like my boyfriend was, my flat was turned into a prop cupboard, and to know that what you are producing in your campaigns is going to be useful for the next generation. Therefore, don't fuck it up. Put it somewhere safe. And of course in London where everything's so precarious, where you've got to move all the time, it's nice to know you've got somewhere where people are going to, and in archives they legally have to really look after it, like putting in cloth bags and stuff like that. So really only in the last couple of years. I guess in formal education I kicked off. I wasn't ever good at school. Probably because, well, I can segue everything to queerness if I wanted to, but probably because I was really uncomfortable at the lack of connection. Because at the time, obviously, I didn't realise that it was Section 28. I didn't know anything about it, but it didn't mean anything to me until I was bored shitless and kicked off. So therefore, anything associated to do with archives or museums or formality, I've never connected with. So museums have been something